A decade ago, a one-bedroom apartment in Barcelona could be rented for €650 a month. Today, that same space can easily cost nearly double. In Madrid, rents have increased by more than 20% in just the past year alone. But this isn't just a story about two cities. It's happening across the entire country. In the last 10 years, while rents have doubled nationwide, salaries have only grown by about 20%. That means more and more people are being crushed by housing costs. In fact, today, one in four Spanish renters spends over 40% of their income just on accommodation. Spain is facing a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis, and, in a way, even an immigration crisis, but not in the way you might expect. The new crisis of affordability. What's driving this pressure isn't just internal. In cities like Barcelona, locals are growing increasingly frustrated, not necessarily with immigrants, but with tourists and wealthy foreigners. In Barcelona, nearly 1 in 4 residents is now an expat, and longtime locals are being priced out of their own neighborhoods. In some cases, they end up working as cleaners or housekeepers in the same homes they once grew up in. Meanwhile, over 3.8 million homes, that's 14% of all housing in Spain, sit completely empty. In cities and historic towns, cultural heritage is being hollowed out. Long-standing traditional businesses have been replaced with souvenir shops and tourist traps. Locals are increasingly angry. Thousands have taken to the streets. Graffiti warns tourists to leave. Some even go as far as confronting them directly. But these tensions are symptoms of a much deeper problem, a problem that started over 2 decades ago. The Spanish housing boom and bust. To understand how things got this bad, we need to go back to the early 2000s. At that time, Spain was experiencing what many called a golden era. The country had joined the EU, adopted the euro, and was seeing huge levels of foreign investment. Credit was cheap and plentiful. The economy was booming. Nowhere was this more obvious than in the construction sector. From 2000 to 2009, Spain built 5 million new homes, increasing the total housing stock by 25%. At one point, Spain was building more homes than Germany, France, and the UK combined. 1 in 5 jobs in the country was tied to construction, and unemployment plummeted from nearly 20% to just 8%. Even blue-collar workers were making big money. Youth unemployment dropped. People were calling it the Spanish miracle. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. The housing market becomes a speculative bubble. As the housing boom gained momentum, it began to attract a new wave of wealthy foreign buyers. In 2000, foreigners made up just 2% of Spain's population. By 2007, that had ballooned to 10%. Many weren't coming just to live. They were buying holiday homes, rental properties, or snapping up homes purely as investments. Spanish mortgage debt skyrocketed from €200 million in 2000 to over €1 billion by 2007. The demand drove prices up rapidly. Between 2000 and 2007, Spanish house prices tripled, rising by over 200%. But the situation still looked stable because wages were also rising, especially for construction workers. Between 2000 and 2007, average incomes rose by 14%, outpacing even countries like France and Germany. For a time, it seemed sustainable. Affordable housing was still available in non-tourist areas, and many Spaniards could still get by. But as history repeatedly shows, any economy built on easy credit and speculative growth is fragile. And in 2008, that fragility was exposed. The crash that changed everything. The 2008 global financial crisis hit Spain hard. The construction industry, the backbone of the economy, collapsed. Unemployment surged back up to over 20%. In just a few short years, the sector lost half of its value, costing Spain over €100 billion annually. Housing construction collapsed from over 600,000 new homes a year to fewer than 30,000. Many who had taken on large mortgages suddenly couldn't pay. Home values plummeted, jobs disappeared. Entire towns, built in expectation of endless growth, were left half-finished and abandoned. But here's the most critical point. The crisis never really ended. A legacy of stagnation and emptiness. Nearly 2 decades later, the Spanish economy is still struggling with the aftershocks of that crash. Since 2008, average wages have barely increased at all, just about 4% over nearly 20 years. Meanwhile, in cities like Valencia and Barcelona, rents continue to rise at double-digit rates every year. Even stranger is the issue of empty homes. At the peak of the housing boom, hundreds of thousands of units were built on cheap, poorly located land, far from city centers and with no infrastructure. When the crash hit, development stopped, and these areas never filled in. By 2022, there were still 450,000 newly built homes that had never been sold, many of them uninhabitable. This huge surplus has paralyzed new construction. Developers are hesitant to build more when so many homes already sit empty. As a result, Spain has one of the lowest home building rates in Europe, just 80,000 new homes per year compared to 600,000 during the boom. Migration and investment pressure. At the same time, Spain's population has kept growing, mostly due to migration. In 1998, immigrants made up only 1.6% of the population. By 2022, that number was nearly 20%. In 2023, 90% of Spain's population growth came from migration. This growth is especially concentrated in cities like Madrid, Valencia, and Barcelona, exactly where housing supply has failed to keep pace. And many newcomers, particularly those with money, aren't just looking for homes. They're looking for investments. Spain's limited supply, high demand, and tourism boom make the property market extremely attractive, and that makes housing even more unaffordable for regular people. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. Housing becomes an asset class, prices rise further, and ordinary Spaniards are pushed further to the margins. The future is slipping away. Today, this housing crisis isn't just a financial issue, it's an existential one. Youth unemployment in Spain is over 27%, more than twice the EU average. The jobs that do exist are concentrated in cities, but those cities are unaffordable. In Barcelona, a basic studio apartment can cost 1,200 euros per month, while minimum wage is only around 926 euros. That means an entire month's work is just enough to pay rent, nothing left for food, transport, or a future. So young people either stay at home or leave the country altogether. And without young people entering the workforce, Spain's economic future is in jeopardy. Innovation slows, tax revenue falls, growth stalls. A nation that once looked unstoppable now seems stuck in place. Can it be fixed? The Spanish government is finally starting to act. One of its boldest proposals is a 100% tax on property purchases by non-EU buyers, aimed at discouraging foreign speculation. There's also talk of banning short-term rentals and limiting Airbnb-style operations. But these moves come with risks. If foreign investment dries up, developers might stop building altogether, which could make supply even tighter. And even if these reforms succeed, many fear it's too little, too late. A generation has already been priced out. Cities are losing their culture, families are being uprooted, and the dream of home ownership, once central to Spanish life, is now slipping out of reach. Spain's housing crisis isn't just about high prices. It's a cautionary tale of what happens when housing is treated as an asset rather than a basic human need. It's the story of how short-term gains, foreign speculation, and political inaction combine to create a crisis that's reshaping an entire nation. Fixing this won't be easy. It will take long-term planning, major investment, and a shift in mindset, one that values homes not as tools for profit, but as the foundation of a stable society. Until then, for many, living in Spain will remain far worse than it should be.